AITA for refusing to let my sister and her husband move into my house after finding out they lied about why they lost their apartment. I, 34F, own a modest house in a quiet neighborhood that I worked incredibly hard to afford. I'm a single woman with no kids, and I've been living here for about 5 years. I'm proud of what I've accomplished, especially because I came from a family that always struggled financially. My parents didn't own a home, and we bounced between rentals when I was a kid. Buying my own place felt like breaking a cycle, and it's something I hold very close to my heart. My younger sister, Rachel, 29F, has always been chaotic, to put it lightly. She's sweet and fun, but she's also made some questionable life choices. She's married to Brian, 32M, and while I try not to judge, they've always had a turbulent relationship. They've broken up and gotten back together so many times that I lost count years ago. They both struggle with keeping jobs, and their finances have always been a mess. Despite that, I've always tried to be supportive without enabling bad decisions. A few months ago, Rachel called me in a panic. She and Brian were being evicted from their apartment, and she had nowhere to go. She was crying on the phone, telling me that their landlord was heartless and unfair and that they had been given only 30 days to vacate. She made it sound like they were completely blindsided. I was shocked and asked her what happened. She told me that the landlord had decided to sell the property and had kicked them out without any warning. At first, I was angry on her behalf. It seemed so unfair, and I couldn't imagine how stressful it must have been for her. She asked if they could stay with me temporarily while they got back on their feet. I was hesitant. I've always been very protective of my space, and I know how chaotic Rachel and Brian can be. But she's my sister, and I didn't want to see her homeless. I told her I needed to think about it and would let her know soon. Over the next few days, I started preparing myself mentally for the possibility of having them live with me. I made a list of ground rules I wanted to establish, like contributing to groceries, keeping the place clean, and sticking to a timeline for finding a new place. I was nervous but felt like it was the right thing to do. However, before I gave Rachel an answer, I ended up running into a mutual acquaintance who happened to know Rachel's landlord. During our conversation, the topic of Rachel's eviction came up, and this acquaintance gave me a very different version of events. According to her, Rachel and Brian weren't evicted because the landlord was selling the property. They were evicted because they hadn't paid rent in 4 months. On top of that, they had damaged the apartment extensively, including breaking a window during one of their infamous fights. The landlord had apparently been more than patient with them, but finally reached his breaking point and filed for eviction. I was furious. I felt like I'd been lied to and manipulated. If Rachel had been honest with me about why they were being evicted, I would have approached the situation differently. But instead, she painted herself as the victim of an unfair landlord, conveniently leaving out the part where she and Brian hadn't held up their end of the lease agreement. When I confronted Rachel about it, she initially tried to deny everything. But when I told her what I'd learned, she broke down and admitted that it was true. She said they had fallen on hard times and couldn't keep up with the rent. She also admitted that the fight that led to the broken window had been particularly bad, but she insisted that things were different now and that they were working on their relationship. I told her I couldn't let them move in with me. I explained that my house is my sanctuary and that I wasn't willing to take on the stress of having them live with me, especially after they had lied to me. I told her that I love her and want to help in other ways, like giving her some money to stay at a motel temporarily or helping her look for resources to get back on her feet. But I made it clear that moving into my house was not an option. Rachel was furious. She accused me of being heartless and said that family is supposed to help each other in times of need. She said I was being selfish for prioritizing my precious house over her and Brian's well-being. She even dragged our parents into it, and they called me to tell me I should reconsider. They said that Rachel and Brian just need a little help and that it's my responsibility as her sister to step up. I tried explaining my side, but they weren't hearing it. They said I was letting Rachel down when she needed me most. Since then, Rachel and I haven't spoken much. When we do, it's tense and awkward. She's staying with a friend for now, but she's made it clear that she thinks I'm in the wrong. Meanwhile, my parents keep calling to pressure me into letting her move in. They've even suggested that I'm being classist because I've forgotten what it's like to struggle now that I own a home. That comment hurt because I've worked so hard to get to where I am, and it's not like I've ever looked down on anyone. I just don't want to jeopardize my peace and stability by taking on someone else's chaos. Some of my friends have said I did the right thing by setting boundaries, but others have suggested that I should reconsider since it's my sister and she's in a tough spot. Part of me feels guilty because I do want to help her, but I also feel like I need to protect my own well-being. I don't want to enable her and Brian's bad behavior or put myself in a situation where I'm cleaning up their messes. So, AITA for refusing to let my sister and her husband move into my house after finding out they lied about why they lost their apartment. AITA for telling my parents I won't take care of my brother anymore and moving out after years of being his default caretaker. I, 26F, am the middle child in my family. I have an older sister, Lily, 30F, and a younger brother, James, 17M. James has cerebral palsy and is nonverbal, requiring 24/7 care. My parents have always been his primary caretakers, but over the years, that responsibility has shifted heavily onto me. Growing up, my parents were clear about one thing: family sticks together, no matter what. They made sacrifices to ensure James had everything he needed, and I admire them for that. But it often felt like Lily and I had to sacrifice just as much, if not more, for James's sake. Vacations, outings, and even simple things like family dinners revolved around his needs. Lily moved out when she was 19, and while I don't blame her, it left me as the only sibling at home to help out. From the time I was 12, I started helping care for James. It started small, helping feed him, keeping an eye on him while my parents rested, or assisting with his wheelchair. As I got older, the responsibilities increased. By the time I was 18, I was handling his personal care, administering medication, and managing his therapy appointments. My parents often said I was a natural caregiver and that James responded well to me, which made it hard to say no when they asked for more help. I didn't go away to college because they needed me at home. I commuted to a local university while balancing classes and James's care. My parents assured me that they appreciated my help and that it wouldn't always be like this. They said they were just trying to make it through until James turned 18 and they could explore more long-term care options for him. Fast forward to this year. I graduated college 3 years ago and started working full-time. I've been saving to move out, but it's been slow because I still spend so much time helping with James. I work from 9 to 5 and come home to immediately take over his care so my parents can have a break. On weekends, I'm often the one taking him to therapy or staying home while my friends go out because my parents need a night to themselves. I haven't had a vacation in years, and my social life has all but disappeared. A few months ago, I brought up the idea of moving out. I told my parents that I wanted to start living on my own and focus on building my life. My mom immediately got defensive, saying that I was abandoning my family and leaving them to deal with everything by themselves. My dad said that they're not getting any younger, and they were counting on me to step up as James gets older. They asked me how I could even consider leaving when they've done so much for me, and James needs me. I felt horrible. I started second-guessing myself, thinking maybe I was being selfish. So, I put off my plans and kept going with the same routine. But the resentment kept building. I was exhausted, stressed, and felt like my life revolved around James. I love him dearly, but I've started to feel like I'm losing myself in the process of taking care of him. The breaking point came 2 weeks ago. I had planned a weekend trip with a few friends, my first time taking a break in years. I told my parents about it well in advance, and they said it was fine. But the night before I was supposed to leave, my mom said they needed me to cancel because they had an emergency and couldn't watch James. When I asked what the emergency was, she admitted it was just a last-minute dinner with friends. I refused to cancel my trip and said they'd need to figure it out. My mom accused me of being selfish and left the room in tears. My dad told me I was out of line and that I'd regret this when they're gone one day. I went on the trip anyway, but the guilt ate at me the whole time. When I got back, my parents barely spoke to me, and the tension in the house was unbearable. That's when I realized I couldn't do this anymore. I sat them down and told them that I loved James, but I couldn't keep sacrificing my own life for him. I told them I was moving out within the next few months, and they'd need to start figuring out a long-term plan for his care. They did not take it well. My mom started crying, saying I was abandoning my family. She said they had given up so much for me and Lily, and now I was throwing it all back in their faces. My dad said I was being unrealistic, that I didn't understand how hard it is to care for someone like James, and that I'd regret this decision. They also brought up Lily, saying she's already checked out of the family dynamic, so it's on me to step up. When I tried to explain how burned out I was, they dismissed it, saying I was just being dramatic and that plenty of people manage family obligations without complaining. They said I was choosing an easy life over being there for James, who doesn't have the luxury of walking away from a situation. That comment hurt the most because it made me feel like a terrible person. Since then, things have been tense at home. I've been looking at apartments and plan to move out in the next 2 months, but my parents are still pressuring me to reconsider. My mom keeps making passive-aggressive comments about how family doesn't turn its back on family, and my dad barely talks to me unless it's about James. Even Lily has weighed in, saying she understands where I'm coming from but thinks I'm being too harsh on mom and dad. I'm torn. I know my parents are under immense pressure, and I feel for them. But at the same time, I can't keep putting my life on hold indefinitely. I want to have my own career, relationships, and maybe even a family someday. And I can't do that if I'm tethered to this situation forever. AITA for telling my parents I won't take care of my brother anymore and moving out. AITA for refusing to let my best friend live with me after she burned bridges with everyone else. I, 27F, have a best friend, Callie, 27F, who I've known since we were 14. Callie is one of those people who lights up every room she walks into. She's charming, funny, and incredibly magnetic. Over the years, though, I've also come to realize that Callie is, for lack of a better word, chaotic. She tends to burn through jobs, friendships, and relationships at an alarming rate. I've always been her constant, her rock, and I'm usually the one picking up the pieces when things fall apart. A little background on Callie. She grew up in a dysfunctional household with parents who were more concerned with fighting each other than raising her. I think that's part of why I've always been so protective of her. I feel like I'm one of the few stable things in her life. She's bounced between jobs for as long as I've known her, never holding one for more than a year. She's also had a string of messy breakups, and while she always has dramatic stories about how her exes are crazy, I've noticed a pattern of her being the common denominator. Despite all this, Callie is incredibly lovable, and I genuinely care about her. She's like the sister I never had. But over the past few years, it's become increasingly clear that our friendship is a bit one-sided. I'm always the one listening to her problems, loaning her money, or giving her a place to crash when she's in between apartments, which happens a lot. She, on the other hand, is less reliable. If I ever try to talk about my own issues, she either brushes it off or finds a way to make it about her. The breaking point came about 3 months ago. Callie had been living with her boyfriend, Adam, 31M, for about a year. Things seemed fine on the surface, but one day she called me sobbing, saying Adam had kicked her out and she had nowhere to go. I asked her what happened, and she told me he was controlling and jealous and couldn't handle her independence. I was furious on her behalf and immediately offered to let her stay with me for a week while she figured things out. When she moved in, things were fine at first. But after a couple of days, I started noticing inconsistencies in her story about Adam. She said he was jealous of her co-workers, but she hadn't worked in months. She claimed he was obsessed with her social media, but she rarely posted anything. Eventually, Adam reached out to me. He told me that Callie had cheated on him multiple times, and that he'd finally had enough after finding texts between her and another guy. I confronted Callie about it, and she admitted it was true, but said it wasn't a big deal because Adam had been boring and emotionally unavailable. That was the first time I started to feel like maybe I didn't know Callie as well as I thought. She stayed with me for the full week, but didn't seem to make any effort to find a new place or job. When the week was up, I told her she needed to leave, and she went to stay with another friend. Since then, she's cycled through living with several different people. Every time, the same pattern repeats. She moves in, things are fine for a while, and then she gets into some kind of fight or disagreement and has to leave. She's burned through almost all of her friendships at this point. Her last roommate, who was also a mutual friend, told me Callie had been taking her clothes without asking, throwing parties when she wasn't home, and even borrowing money from her wallet. When the roommate confronted her, Callie accused her of being stingy and moved out. Now, Callie has come back to me. She called me a few days ago and told me she's out of options and needs a place to stay. She said I'm her last real friend and begged me to let her move in. I told her I'd think about it, but honestly, I don't want her here. I know how this will go. She'll move in, take over my space, contribute nothing, and make me feel like a guest in my own home. And when I finally push back, she'll call me selfish and ungrateful, just like she's done with everyone else. When I told her no, she lost it. She accused me of abandoning her when she needed me most and said I'm not the person she thought I was. She brought up all the times I told her I'd always be there for her and said I'm a hypocrite for turning my back on her now. She even brought up her childhood and how hard things were for her growing up, saying I should know better than to leave her homeless. I told her that I love her and care about her, but I can't keep sacrificing my own peace and stability for her. I reminded her that I've helped her countless times before and that it's not fair for her to expect me to keep cleaning up her messes. She hung up on me, and now I'm getting texts from mutual friends saying I'm heartless and selfish for not helping her. Apparently, she's been telling people I'm refusing to help her because I don't like her anymore, which isn't true. I do like her, but I'm tired of being her safety net. My parents, who know Callie well, are divided. My mom thinks I did the right thing by setting boundaries, but my dad thinks I should let her stay for a little while since she has nowhere else to go. I feel so conflicted. On one hand, I don't want to see her homeless. On the other hand, I know this situation will end badly if I let her move in. AITA for refusing to let my best friend live with me, knowing she has no other options. AITA for refusing to sell my late grandmother's house to my cousin, even though it's causing a family feud. This situation has been escalating for months now, and I'm honestly at my wit's end. I, 28F, inherited my late grandmother's house about 2 years ago. My grandmother and I were very close, and I spent most of my childhood summers with her. She taught me how to cook, how to garden, and so many other things that made up some of my best memories. When she passed away, she left the house to me in her will, explicitly stating that she wanted me to have it because she knew how much it meant to me. The house is a cozy 2-bedroom cottage that my grandmother lived in for nearly 40 years. It's in a small town that's kind of in the middle of nowhere, but I love it. After she passed, I spent months fixing it up and renovating it. I used my savings, took on extra freelance work, and poured my heart into making the house feel like my own. I moved in about a year ago and have been living here ever since. It's quiet, peaceful, and everything I wanted. Enter my cousin, Beth, 31F. Beth and I were never super close growing up, but we got along fine. She lives about an hour away in the city with her husband and their 2 kids. Beth has always been one of those people who manages to get what she wants, whether it's through charm, persistence, or just outright guilt-tripping. I've seen her do it with other family members over the years, but I never thought she'd direct that energy at me. A few months ago, Beth called me out of the blue. She said she and her husband were thinking about moving out of the city because it was getting too expensive and they wanted a fresh start for their kids. She told me she'd always loved Grandma's house and asked if I'd consider selling it to her. She made it sound like she was doing me a favor, saying things like, "You don't need all that space and it'd be perfect for us." I told her I wasn't interested in selling. I explained that the house meant a lot to me and that I put a lot of time and effort into making it my home. Beth didn't take it well. She said I was being selfish and inconsiderate and that Grandma would have wanted her to have the house because she has kids and needs it more. I stood my ground, but she didn't drop it. Over the next few weeks, she kept calling and texting, trying to convince me to change my mind. She even brought other family members into it, telling them I was hoarding the house and refusing to help her. Suddenly, I was getting calls from aunts, uncles, and even my parents, all telling me I should do the right thing and sell the house to Beth. The thing is, my grandmother's was crystal clear. She left the house to me, specifically stating that she wanted me to have it because of our close bond. She didn't mention Beth or anyone else in the family. But Beth has been twisting the narrative, saying Grandma would have wanted the house to go to someone with a family who could fill it with love and laughter. She even said it was wasted on me because I live alone and don't have kids. At one point, Beth and her husband showed up unannounced at my house. They brought their kids with them, and Beth started walking around, pointing out where she'd put things like a playroom or a garden for the kids. I was so stunned, I didn't even know what to say. When I told them they were overstepping, Beth got angry and said I was being heartless. Her husband chimed in, saying it wasn't fair for me to hog the house when they needed it more. After that, I stopped engaging with Beth entirely. I blocked her number and told the rest of the family I wasn't discussing it anymore. That only made things worse. Beth went on a full-blown smear campaign, telling everyone I was a greedy, ungrateful brat who didn't care about family. She even accused me of stealing the house from her, which makes no sense because, again, it was left to me in the will. The family is now completely divided. Some people are on my side, saying I have every right to keep the house and that Beth is being manipulative. Others think I should compromise by selling it to her at a discounted price or letting her rent it. My parents are caught in the middle but lean toward Beth's side, saying I should think about the kids and how much they benefit from living there. The latest development is that Beth has been spreading rumors that I'm planning to sell the house to a stranger just to spite her, which is absolutely not true. I've made it clear from the beginning that I'm not selling the house to anyone, period. But now even more family members are coming out of the woodwork to criticize me, saying I'm being petty and vindictive. I feel like I'm going crazy. On one hand, I know I have every right to keep the house. It's mine, and my grandmother wanted me to have it. But on the other hand, the constant pressure and guilt-tripping are wearing me down. I never wanted to cause a family feud, and it hurts to have people I care about think so poorly of me. I started second-guessing myself. Am I being selfish for not selling the house to Beth? Would it really be so terrible to let it go and avoid all this drama? Or am I right to stand my ground and honor my grandmother's wishes? AITA? AITA for refusing to host my brother and his family for a month, even though they claim it's an emergency? For context, I, 33M, live alone in a 2-bedroom house that I worked hard to buy. I've been living here for about 5 years, and while it's not a mansion, it's my sanctuary. I've always been a private person, and I like my space. I'm the youngest of 3 siblings, and while I love my family, we're very different in how we approach life. My older brother, Jake, 38M, is married to Sarah, 35F, and they have 3 kids under the age of 10. Jake has always been the golden child of the family. He's charismatic, outgoing, and the kind of guy who always seems to land on his feet, even when he makes questionable choices. But he's also notoriously irresponsible with money. For as long as I can remember, Jake has been the type to live beyond his means, constantly upgrading his car, taking expensive vacations, and buying the latest gadgets, even when it's clear he can't afford them. About 2 weeks ago, Jake called me in a panic. He said they were being evicted from their rental home because they'd fallen behind on rent for several months. He blamed his landlord, saying the guy was heartless for not giving them more time. Jake told me they had nowhere else to go and asked if they could stay with me just for a few weeks while they figured things out. He promised they'd be quiet, respectful, and out of my hair in no time. Now, this isn't the first time Jake has been in a financial bind. Over the years, he's borrowed money from me, our parents, and even friends. Sometimes he pays it back, but more often than not, he doesn't. I've bailed him out of trouble more times than I can count, and it's always the same story. He's sorry. He'll do better. He'll learn from his mistakes. But he never does. I told Jake I needed some time to think about it. I wasn't comfortable with the idea of having 5 extra people in my house, even temporarily. My home is my safe space, and the thought of losing that peace for an indefinite amount of time was overwhelming. Plus, knowing Jake, a few weeks could easily turn into months. When I didn't give him an immediate answer, he got annoyed. He said I was being selfish and that family is supposed to help each other. He reminded me that he and Sarah let me crash on their couch for a few weeks years ago when I was between apartments. While that's true, the circumstances were completely different. I was in my early 20s, fresh out of college, and had nowhere else to go. I also kept to myself, helped out around the house, and left as soon as I could. Jake's situation feels much more complicated. After a couple of days of thinking it over, I called Jake back and told him I couldn't let them stay with me. I explained that my house isn't big enough to accommodate 5 extra people, especially with 3 young kids. I also pointed out that he has a pattern of overextending himself financially and that this might be an opportunity for him to reassess his priorities. I told him I was willing to help in other ways, like loaning him some money for a hotel or helping him find resources for affordable housing, but I just couldn't host them. Jake did not take it well. He accused me of looking down on him and said I was abandoning him in his time of need. He brought up the fact that I'm single and don't have kids, saying I don't understand what it's like to have a family to provide for. He also implied that since I have a spare bedroom, I should be willing to share my space. Sarah even called me later, crying and begging me to reconsider, saying their kids don't deserve to be homeless. Things escalated further when my parents got involved. Jake went to them after I said no, and now they're pressuring me to let him stay. My mom told me I was being cold-hearted and that Jake's kids are my nieces and nephews, so I should be willing to sacrifice for them. My dad, who's usually more level-headed, also seemed to think I should help, saying it's just a few weeks and they're family. When I pointed out that my parents have a guest room and could host Jake themselves, they got defensive and said their house isn't set up for kids. The guilt-tripping has been relentless. Jake has been sending me passive-aggressive texts, and Sarah has posted vague messages on social media about how some people turn their backs on family when it matters most. Even my older sister, Emily 40F, has weighed in, saying I'm being too rigid and that I'll regret it if I don't step up to help. However, Emily conveniently hasn't offered to take Jake in herself, even though she has a bigger house than mine. I feel like I'm being unfairly cast as the villain here. It's not that I don't care about Jake or his family. I do, but I also know my limits. Hosting 5 people, including 3 kids, would completely upend my life. I work from home, and my job requires a quiet environment. I also struggle with anxiety, and the thought of having my space invaded like that makes me feel physically ill. On top of that, I can't shake the feeling that Jake brought this situation on himself. He and Sarah have been living beyond their means for years, and this eviction didn't come out of nowhere. They had months to address the problem, but chose not to. I don't think it's fair for them to expect me to clean up their mess, especially when I've already helped Jake so many times in the past. Still, the backlash from my family is making me question myself. Am I being too harsh? Should I put my own needs aside and let Jake and his family stay with me, even if it's just for a little while? Or am I right to stand my ground and protect my peace? AITA? AITA for refusing to help my former best friend after she showed up at my doorstep with her baby, despite her saying I owe her everything. I'll try to explain this as clearly as possible because things have gotten really messy, and I'm questioning whether I did the right thing. This all started about a month ago, but the history behind it goes way back, so bear with me. I, 29F, had a best friend, Laura, 30F, who was like a sister to me for most of my life. We met in middle school and were inseparable through high school and college. Laura was the kind of friend who would drop everything for you, and I thought I'd do the same for her. She helped me through some tough times, including when my dad passed away when I was 19. I honestly thought we'd be in each other's lives forever, but things started to shift after college. Laura had always been a bit of a party girl, and while I grew out of that phase, she didn't. She started dating this guy, Nick, who was bad news from the beginning. He was controlling, manipulative, and just gave everyone bad vibes. Laura didn't see it, though, and over time, our friendship started to fray because of him. Every time I tried to express my concerns, she'd brush me off or accuse me of being jealous. Eventually, I stopped bringing it up because it wasn't worth the fights. A few years ago, things came to a head when Laura borrowed a significant amount of money from me. She said she needed it to pay off some debts Nick had racked up in her name. Against my better judgment, I gave her the money because she swore she'd pay me back within a year. Spoiler alert, she didn't. Every time I brought it up, she'd make excuses or get defensive. It caused a lot of tension, but I let it slide because I didn't want to lose the friendship. Then about 2 years ago, we had a massive falling out. Nick had cheated on her again, and she came to me for support. I tried to be there for her, but when I gently suggested that she might be better off without him, she lost it. She accused me of never supporting her relationship and called me a fake friend who wanted to see her fail. She said some really hurtful things, including that she'd never truly forgiven me for something I said years ago. I still don't even know what she was referring to. After that, we stopped talking entirely. Fast forward to last month. It's been 2 years of no contact, and I've moved on with my life. I bought a small house, started a new job, and am in a healthy, happy relationship with my boyfriend, Matt, 31M. Out of the blue, Laura shows up at my doorstep holding a baby. I was completely shocked. She looked exhausted and told me she had nowhere else to go. She said she'd left Nick for good and needed a place to stay while she got back on her feet. I was stunned and didn't know what to say. Laura went on to explain that after she left Nick, she tried staying with her mom, but they had a falling out. She also couldn't go to her sisters because they weren't on good terms. She said she didn't have anyone else to turn to, and that she thought of me because I was always the one who had her back. At this point, I was torn. On one hand, this was someone I used to consider family, and she was clearly in a desperate situation. On the other hand, the way our friendship ended was so painful, and I wasn't sure I could just let her back into my life like nothing had happened. Plus, I couldn't ignore the fact that she'd burned bridges with almost everyone else in her life. It felt like a red flag. I told Laura I needed time to think about it. She got upset and started crying, saying she didn't have time and that she and her baby didn't even have a place to sleep that night. She kept saying things like, "You owe me this," and "After everything I've done for you, how can you even hesitate?" That's when I started to feel really uncomfortable. The more she talked, the more it felt like she was trying to guilt me into helping her rather than genuinely apologizing for the past or acknowledging why we drifted apart. I ended up telling her I couldn't let her stay with me. I offered to pay for a few nights at a nearby motel and even gave her a list of local resources that could help her find housing and support. Laura didn't take it well. She accused me of abandoning her in her time of need and said I was proving that I'd never really cared about her. She stormed off, and I haven't heard from her since. Since then, word has gotten out, and the backlash has been intense. Laura must have told some mutual friends because I've been getting messages and calls from people saying I'm heartless for turning her away. One friend even said, "If the roles were reversed, Laura would have taken you in without hesitation." My mom, who knows about our history, thinks I did the right thing, but even she admitted she felt bad for Laura and the baby. Matt has been supportive, but he also pointed out that I seem really affected by the situation, even though I know I had valid reasons for saying no. And he's right. I keep replaying the whole thing in my head and wondering if I should have just sucked it up and let her stay. Was I too harsh? Did I let my pride get in the way of doing the right thing? Or was I justified in protecting my boundaries, even if it meant turning away someone who was once so important to me? AITA? AITA for refusing to sell my grandmother's house to my sister, even though she says it's her legacy. This is a long one, so buckle up. I've been wrestling with this situation for months now, and it feels like every decision I make only digs me deeper into family drama. I genuinely don't know if I'm being unfair or if my sister is being unreasonable. I, 34M, inherited my grandmother's house last year after she passed away. My grandmother was my absolute favorite person in the world, and I spent a good chunk of my childhood at her house. It's not huge or fancy, but it's a cozy 3-bedroom cottage with a big garden that my grandmother loved. She was an avid gardener, and the place is filled with fruit trees, flowers, and little garden statues that she collected over the years. To me, it's more than just a house. It's a piece of her. I grew up with one sibling, my sister Rachel, 31F. Rachel and I were pretty close as kids, but as we got older, we started to drift apart. She's always been a bit more materialistic and ambitious, while I've been content with a simpler life. Rachel moved out of state after college, got married, and now lives in a big city with her husband and their 2 kids. I stayed in our hometown working as a freelance graphic designer and living a quieter life. We've stayed in touch, but we don't see each other often. When my grandmother passed away, it hit me hard. She and I were very close, and I was the one who helped her around the house in her later years. I'd mow the lawn, fix things, and take her grocery shopping. She always joked that I was her favorite grandson, even though I'm her only grandson. Rachel would visit occasionally, but it was clear that she and Grandma weren't as close. They were cordial, but they didn't have the same bond. To my surprise, Grandma left her house to me in her will. I knew she cared about me, but I didn't expect her to give me something so significant. My parents weren't upset. My mom even said it made sense, considering how much time I spent helping Grandma. Rachel, however, was furious. She called me the day after the will was read and accused me of manipulating Grandma into giving me the house. She said it wasn't fair because she has kids, and they're the next generation of the family, so they should have the house. I tried to explain that I had no idea Grandma was going to leave it to me, but she didn't want to hear it. At first, I thought Rachel's anger would blow over, but it hasn't. A few months ago, she called me again and said she wanted to buy the house from me. She said it would be a great place for her family to spend summers and holidays, and she wanted her kids to experience the same memories we had growing up. She offered me what I'm pretty sure is below market value, framing it as a family discount. When I told her I wasn't interested in selling, she completely lost it. She said I was being selfish and accused me of hoarding the house. She pointed out that I don't have a family of my own and don't need the extra space. She also said that since I'm just one person, I don't deserve to keep a house that could be used for a family. I told her that the house isn't just a piece of property to me. It's filled with memories of Grandma, and I'm not ready to part with it. She called me dramatic and said I was letting my emotions cloud my judgment. Over the next few weeks, Rachel escalated things. She involved our parents, who initially tried to stay out of it, but eventually started pressuring me to compromise for the sake of family harmony. My dad suggested I let Rachel use the house for holidays, which I would have been fine with if she hadn't been so aggressive about it. My mom, who usually sides with Rachel, said I should consider what's best for the family. I tried to explain my side, but it felt like no one was really listening. Rachel also started telling extended family members about the situation, spinning it in a way that made me look like the bad guy. She said I was being greedy and unreasonable, and that I was holding the house hostage. I started getting messages from aunts, uncles, and cousins, all telling me I should do the right thing and let Rachel have the house. One cousin even called me selfish, saying that Rachel's kids deserve a stable place to build memories more than I do. The final straw came last month when Rachel showed up at my house unannounced with her husband and kids. She said they were just visiting, but kept dropping hints about how much they loved Grandma's house and how perfect it would be for their family. Her husband even started pointing out little fixes he'd make, like tearing out the garden to put in a play area for the kids. I was livid but kept my cool. After they left, I told Rachel in no uncertain terms that I didn't appreciate the ambush and that my decision wasn't changing. Since then, Rachel has gone full-blown passive-aggressive. She's been posting on social media about how family should come first and how some people don't understand the value of legacy. She's also stopped inviting me to family events, which has been incredibly hurtful. My parents are stuck in the middle, but they've made it clear they think I should at least consider selling to keep the peace. Here's the thing. I don't think I'm being unreasonable. This house means the world to me, and I don't want to sell it, especially not as someone who's treated me like dirt since Grandma passed. I've offered to let Rachel visit whenever she wants, but that's not enough for her. She wants ownership, and she's made it clear she won't stop until she gets it. Now I'm starting to doubt myself. Am I being selfish for holding on to the house? Should I just sell it to Rachel to avoid all this drama? Or is it fair for me to stand my ground and keep the home that means so much to me? AITA? AITA for refusing to let my brother and his wife live in my late mother's house. Even though they're struggling financially and I don't need it, I've been grappling with this situation for over a year now, and the tension in my family has gotten to the point where I feel like I'm being painted as the villain. I'm struggling to figure out if I'm truly in the wrong here, so I need some outside perspective. To start, I, 35M, was very close to my late mother. She passed away 2 years ago after a long battle with cancer, and it was one of the most difficult times in my life. My mom was my rock and one of the kindest people I've ever known. Growing up, she always went out of her way to make sure my younger brother, Jake, 32M, and I had everything we needed, even when money was tight. My dad passed away when I was 10, so Mom raised us on her own, working multiple jobs to keep a roof over our heads. The house we grew up in isn't anything fancy. It's a modest 3-bedroom home in the suburbs, but it holds a lot of sentimental value for me. After Mom passed, she left the house to me in her will. Jake wasn't left out. Mom set aside some money for him, which I thought was fair given that I've always been the one to take care of the house. I moved back in with Mom after college when her health started declining, and I was her primary caregiver during her last years. Jake visited occasionally, but has always been more distant. He moved to a different state after high school and has spent the last decade bouncing between jobs and struggling to find stability. After Mom's death, I kept the house. It felt like a way to keep a part of her with me, and I've been living there ever since. I'm single and work from home, so it's been nice to have the space and the memories. I've also put a lot of work into fixing the place up, upgrading the plumbing, repainting, landscaping the yard, things that Mom always wanted to do but couldn't afford. The problem started about a year ago when Jake and his wife, Lisa, 30F, hit a rough patch financially. Jake lost his job, and Lisa's hours at her retail job were cut back. They have 2 kids and were struggling to make ends meet. They ended up losing their apartment and had to move in with Lisa's parents, which, from what I've heard, hasn't been going well. Jake reached out to me, asking if they could move into Mom's house temporarily while they got back on their feet. At first, I was sympathetic. I know how hard it is to struggle financially, and I felt bad for my nieces who didn't ask for any of this. But the more I thought about it, the less comfortable I felt with the idea. For one, I've seen how Jake handles money, or doesn't handle it. He's always been terrible with finances, spending money he doesn't have on things he doesn't need. He's also been known to overstay his welcome whenever someone tries to help him out. In college, he moved in with a friend for a few months and ended up living there rent-free for over a year until they finally kicked him out. I was worried that if I let him move in, he'd never leave. There's also the fact that this house isn't just a property to me. It's my home. It's where I feel closest to Mom, and the thought of it being taken over by Jake, Lisa, and their kids, who could be a handful, was overwhelming. I knew that if they moved in, it would never feel like my home again. So, I told Jake no. I tried to be gentle about it, explaining that I didn't think it was a good idea and that I wasn't comfortable giving up the house. I even offered to help him out financially, like paying for a deposit on a new apartment or helping him cover some bills, but he wasn't interested. He said that what they needed was a place to live, not a handout, and that I was being selfish for hoarding the house when I'm just one person living there alone. Since then, things have escalated. Jake has been bad-mouthing me to anyone who will listen, telling our extended family that I'm letting him and his kids suffer while I live comfortably in a house I don't need. A few family members have taken his side, calling me selfish and saying that family should come first. Mayan even told me that Mom would be ashamed of me for not helping Jake, which really stung. But not everyone is against me. My best friend thinks I'm right to set boundaries, and even a few family members have admitted that Jake has a history of taking advantage of people's kindness. They've pointed out that he and Lisa have burned bridges with nearly everyone else in their lives, which is probably why they're so desperate now. Still, the guilt has been eating at me, and I keep wondering if I'm being too harsh. Jake hasn't let up, though. He sent me multiple messages accusing me of being a terrible brother and saying I've forgotten what it's like to struggle. Lisa has also chimed in, saying that I'm punishing their kids for mistakes they made. They've even tried using my nieces to guilt me, sending me pictures of them with captions like, "Don't they deserve a stable home?" It's manipulative, and it makes me angry, but it also makes me feel like maybe I'm the bad guy here. The thing is, I don't trust Jake and Lisa to take care of the house. I've put so much time and money into fixing it up, and I know they wouldn't treat it the same way. Plus, I can't shake the feeling that if I let them move in, I'd never get them out. Jake insists it would only be for a few months, but I've heard that before, and I don't believe him. I've worked hard to make this house my home, and I don't want to lose that. So, am I the asshole for refusing to let my brother and his family live in the house, even though they're struggling? Should I be willing to sacrifice my comfort for the sake of family? Or is it okay to prioritize my own boundaries and peace of mind? I don't know anymore. AITA for not inviting my sister to my wedding after she insulted my fiancé. I, 29F, am getting married in a couple of months to the love of my life, Dan, 32M. We've been together for 5 years, and we're absolutely in love. He's my rock, my best friend, and the person I want to spend the rest of my life with. But there's one person in my life who isn't as enthusiastic about our relationship. My sister, Jenny, 31F. To give some context, Jenny and I have always had a complicated relationship. Growing up, we were very close at times, and other times, we were at each other's throats. We fought over everything, clothes, friends, and especially boys. Looking back, I can't pinpoint exactly when things started to go south, but I think Jenny has always been a bit competitive with me. She's always felt like I got more attention from our parents and relatives, and while I understand some of that, it's also not my fault. I didn't ask for more attention. I just always did well in school, had good friends, and got along with people easily. Jenny, on the other hand, has always struggled with self-esteem. She has a bit of a fiery temper and doesn't always know how to keep her emotions in check. But despite all of this, I've always tried to be there for her. I've supported her through breakups, career changes, and even some personal health issues. I always thought we'd eventually get past our differences and be the kind of sisters who could depend on each other. But when Dan came into my life, everything changed. I met Dan when I was 24, and from the start, he was everything I had ever wanted in a partner. He's kind, thoughtful, funny, and incredibly supportive of me. We're both very ambitious, but also understand the importance of having a balanced life. He's the type of person who never puts me down and always encourages me to be the best version of myself. Jenny, however, wasn't immediately on board with our relationship. At first, I thought it was just because she was protective of me, as older sisters tend to be. But over time, I started to realize that she wasn't just being protective. She was actively disliking Dan. She'd make little comments about him, like calling him too nice or too perfect and probably hiding something. But I chalked it up to jealousy and didn't think much of it. However, the situation escalated when we started talking about getting married. Jenny started to be outright rude about Dan whenever I would bring him up. She'd make passive-aggressive remarks about our relationship, like, "I don't know how you can marry someone who still plays video games like a teenager," or "He seems like the type who would forget your birthday." These comments started to hurt, but I brushed them off, thinking she was just going through a phase. She had made a similar fuss when I dated previous boyfriends, and they hadn't lasted, so I figured it was just the same old story. But things took a serious turn a few months ago when we invited Jenny to our engagement party. It was a small gathering at my best friend's house, and Dan and I had both hoped it would be a nice opportunity for everyone to get to know each other better. Jenny, who had already been distant, made it clear from the beginning that she wasn't happy to be there. She barely spoke to Dan and spent most of the evening gossiping with our other relatives about how weird the whole situation felt. To be honest, it made me feel incredibly uncomfortable. But what happened next was completely unforgivable. During the evening, Dan and I stepped away for a moment to take some photos. When we came back, I overheard Jenny saying to one of our cousins, "I don't know why she's marrying him. He's so much more of a doormat than she thinks. She's going to walk all over him and ruin her life." I was absolutely floored. I had never heard her say anything so cruel before. I went up to her immediately and asked her what the hell she was talking about. She just shrugged it off, saying, "I was just joking, relax." But I wasn't relaxed. I was furious. I told her that if she didn't have anything nice to say about Dan, she didn't need to say anything at all. She snapped back at me, "I don't get why you're so obsessed with him. You've always been desperate for attention, and now you're settling for some guy who clearly doesn't know how to stand up for himself." I could feel my blood boiling at this point. I told her that I wasn't going to tolerate her disrespecting my fiancé, especially when he had done nothing wrong. She just rolled her eyes and walked away. The rest of the evening was tense, and I ended up distancing myself from her for the rest of the night. Dan could tell something was off, but I didn't want to burden him with it. That night, I texted Jenny and told her that I didn't want to hear from her unless she was ready to apologize. I also let her know that if she didn't apologize, I wouldn't be inviting her to the wedding. The next few weeks were agonizing. Jenny sent me a few text messages, but they were all full of excuses. She said that I was overreacting and that she was just being honest. She even suggested that maybe Dan and I weren't meant to be together because I was so sensitive and needed to get over myself. Eventually, I made the difficult decision to not invite her to the wedding. I couldn't let someone who treated Dan like that be a part of one of the most important days of my life. I talked to my parents about the situation, and while they were disappointed, they agreed that I had to set boundaries. Jenny was absolutely furious when I told her, and she hasn't spoken to me since. I feel guilty, of course. Jenny is my sister, and we've been through a lot together. But at the same time, I'm not willing to sacrifice my happiness for someone who constantly puts down my relationship. I've tried to make her understand that it's not about her not liking Dan. It's about the way she's treated him and disrespected our relationship. Now, some of my extended family members are calling me selfish for not inviting her. They say I'm letting a small fight come between us, and that family should come first. I've heard some of them say that I'm being dramatic and overprotective of Dan, and that I should just let it go. But I don't think I'm wrong for standing up for him, especially after the things she said. So, AITA for not inviting my sister to my wedding after she insulted my fiancé? AITA for refusing to loan my car to my best friend and causing our friend group to split? I've been sitting on this for weeks now, trying to figure out if I'm the bad guy here. I've talked to a couple of people about it, but their opinions are split, and now I'm starting to question if I handled this the right way. For some context, I, 28M, have a 2018 Toyota Camry that I absolutely love. I saved for years to buy it outright because I didn't want to deal with monthly payments or the stress of debt. It's nothing fancy, but it's reliable, efficient, and has sentimental value because it represents years of hard work and sacrifices. I'm also pretty meticulous about taking care of it. I wash it regularly, keep up with maintenance, and don't let anyone else drive it unless it's an emergency. My best friend, Alex, 28M, and I have been close since high school. We've been through a lot together, and I've always considered him more like a brother than a friend. He's funny, generous, and loyal, but he's also, for lack of a better word, reckless. He's the kind of guy who forgets to pay parking tickets until his car gets booted or who drives on empty and ends up stranded on the side of the road. He's totaled 2 cars in the past 5 years. One was his fault, the other was bad luck, but either way it's been a pattern. Alex's current car broke down about 2 months ago, and he hasn't been able to afford the repairs. He's been borrowing rides from friends, taking public transportation, or using rideshare apps to get around. I've given him rides here and there when it's convenient, and he's always been grateful. But then a few weeks ago, he asked if he could borrow my car for a week. He said he needed it to get to work, run errands, and sort his life out. I immediately felt uneasy about the request. Like I said, I don't let people drive my car unless it's an emergency, and Alex doesn't have the best track record when it comes to taking care of vehicles. I told him I wasn't comfortable loaning him my car, but offered to drive him to work or help him run errands when I could. I thought that was a fair compromise, but he wasn't happy. He said I was being selfish and that as his best friend, I should trust him. He pointed out that he'd driven my car before, true, but only short distances and when I was in the car with him, and that it wasn't fair for me to refuse when I barely use it. For reference, I work from home and don't drive every day, but I still use my car regularly for groceries, appointments, and trips out of town. The conversation escalated, and Alex accused me of prioritizing my car over our friendship. He said he was in a tough spot, and that my refusal to help him was a slap in the face after everything we've been through together. I tried to explain that it wasn't about not wanting to help. It was about my anxiety over letting someone else drive a car that I worked so hard for. But he wasn't hearing it. He left my place in a huff and didn't speak to me for a few days. Then, things got worse. Alex started venting to our mutual friends, painting me as this heartless, selfish guy who refused to help him in his time of need. A couple of them took his side, saying I should have just loaned him the car because it's not like he'd wreck it on purpose. One friend even said I should get over myself because it's just a car. Others, however, understood where I was coming from and said I had every right to set boundaries. Now our friend group is divided. The ones siding with Alex have been cold to me, barely responding to messages or excluding me from group plans. The ones supporting me are stuck in the middle, trying to play peacemaker, but clearly getting frustrated with the drama. I've even had a few people tell me I should apologize to Alex and offer to loan him the car just to smooth things over, but I don't think that's fair. Meanwhile, Alex has doubled down. He sent me a long text last week saying that I've changed and that he doesn't recognize the person I've become. He brought up every favor he's ever done for me, helping me move, covering for me at work years ago, lending me money once when I was short on rent, and said he never thought I'd turn my back on him like this. I felt awful reading it because I do appreciate everything Alex has done for me, but I don't think that means I owe him unlimited access to my car. I try to talk to Alex again to clear the air, but he's been short with me and clearly still upset. He keeps making snide comments about how some people care more about material things than people, and has even started calling me Mr. Rules in a mocking tone. It's exhausting, and I don't know how to fix this. The thing is, I know Alex is struggling right now, and part of me wonders if I should have just loaned him the car to avoid all this drama. But another part of me feels like I had every right to say no, especially given his history with cars and the fact that I wasn't leaving him completely stranded. I was willing to help in other ways. So, am I the asshole for refusing to loan my car to my best friend, even though it's caused this huge rift in our friend group? Should I have just sucked it up and trusted him, or was I right to stick to my boundaries? I'm at a loss here. AITA for refusing to let my friend move in with me after she kicked her boyfriend out. I, 28F, have a close friend, Kate, 29F, who I've known since college. We've always been really close, but our friendship has definitely had its ups and downs. Over the years, Kate and I have supported each other through breakups, job losses, family drama, and all sorts of other challenges. However, lately, things have been a little tense between us, and I'm honestly wondering if I'm in the wrong here. So, to give you some background, Kate has been in a pretty on and off again relationship with her boyfriend, Jake, 31M, for the last few years. The relationship has always been a bit rocky. They've broken up and gotten back together multiple times, and it's honestly been exhausting to watch. The most recent breakup happened about a month ago after Jake allegedly cheated on her. Kate was devastated, but to be honest, I was kind of relieved. I had been hearing all these stories about how he treated her like crap, and I didn't understand why she kept going back to him. Kate, being Kate, is now back on her I need a fresh start kick. She's been talking about moving out of the apartment she shares with Jake for a while, but every time she does, she ends up staying with him or forgiving him. This time, however, it seemed like it was for real. She kicked Jake out of their shared apartment after finding out he had been seeing someone else on the side, and she called me up asking if she could stay with me for a little while. Now, this is where things get complicated. I live in a one-bedroom apartment that's barely big enough for me, let alone another person. I've always been really particular about my space, and I've never been a fan of roommates. It's not that I don't like Kate. I really do. But we've had our issues before when it comes to living together. Back in college, we roomed together for a year, and it wasn't great. She's super messy, doesn't clean up after herself, and sometimes she can be emotionally draining to be around for too long. I ended up doing most of the cleaning and taking care of everything in the apartment while she went out partying and having fun. Fast forward to now, and I've built a life that I'm really proud of. I have a good job, a routine, and a clean, organized apartment. I don't want that to change. I've worked hard to create a peaceful and calm environment, and I don't want to disrupt it. So, when Kate asked me if she could crash with me, I said no. I explained that my apartment is too small, that I don't think it would be a good idea for either of us, and that I'm just not in a place where I want to live in guest. She was really hurt and tried to convince me to let her stay. She said she didn't have anywhere else to go and that she would respect my space. But I stuck to my decision. This is where the drama started. After I turned her down, Kate started posting passive-aggressive things on social media about toxic friends and people who can't be there for you when you need them. I didn't pay too much attention at first, but then she started texting me nonstop, telling me that I was being selfish and that I was abandoning her in her time of need. She told me that I was the only person she could turn to, and I was turning my back on her. I tried to explain that it wasn't personal, but she didn't seem to care. Her messages started getting more and more heated, and eventually, she told me that I was a terrible friend and that she didn't need me in her life anymore. Honestly, I felt really hurt by her response. I understand that she's going through a tough time and that breaking up with Jake must be emotionally draining, but I also feel like she's being unreasonable. I've supported her through so much in the past, and I just don't think it's fair for her to expect me to put my own life and comfort on hold for her. I've been there for her when she's needed me, but at some point, I need to prioritize my own well-being too. A few days after our argument, she texted me again, asking if we could talk. I agreed, and we met up at a coffee shop. She was still upset, but she seemed a little calmer. She apologized for some of the things she said, but she still insisted that I was in the wrong. She said I should have just let her stay for a while, even if it was uncomfortable for me. She argued that real friends should be willing to make sacrifices for each other. I told her that while I understand her frustration, I don't think I should have to sacrifice my peace of mind and personal space just to make her feel better. I explained that being there for her doesn't mean I have to put myself in a position where I feel uncomfortable and stressed. She didn't seem to understand, and we left the coffee shop with a lot of tension still hanging between us. Now I'm left wondering if I made the right call. Part of me feels like I was just looking out for my own needs, and I don't think that's something I should apologize for. On the other hand, I understand that Kate is in a vulnerable place right now, and maybe I should have been more understanding. But I also know from past experience that Kate can be very demanding and that living together again would only lead to frustration and resentment on both sides. I'm not sure where things stand between us right now. We haven't spoken much since our conversation, and I'm not sure if we'll be able to repair our friendship. Part of me feels guilty for not offering her more support, but another part of me feels like she's asking for too much. So, AITA for refusing to let my friend move in with me after she kicked her boyfriend out? Should I have done more to help her? Or is it okay to set boundaries in this situation? AITA for calling off my wedding after my fiancé's mom moved into our house without asking? I, 29F, am engaged to my fiancé, Mark, 31M. We've been together for 4 years, and I honestly thought we had a solid relationship. We were in the middle of planning our wedding, and everything seemed to be going smoothly, until his mom, Diane 58F, decided to move into our house without consulting either of us. Let me give you a bit of background. Mark's family has always been really close-knit. I knew this when I started dating him, and at first I thought it was sweet. Diane has always been very involved in Mark's life. She calls him multiple times a day, and they talk about everything. I thought it was just one of those things that happens when you're close to your parents, and I didn't mind it at first. But over time, I started to feel like I was being overshadowed by Diane. It wasn't just the constant phone calls or the unsolicited advice. She started coming over to our apartment almost every weekend, bringing food, cleaning up after us, and staying for hours. I didn't mind it at first, but it started to feel like my space was being invaded, and my opinions didn't matter when it came to decisions involving the house. At first, I tried to bring it up with Mark gently. I told him that I felt like Diane was getting a little too comfortable in our space, and it was starting to bother me. He would always brush it off, saying things like, "That's just how she is," or "she means well." I didn't want to come across as overly controlling or unsympathetic, so I let it slide for a while. But over time, it became clear that this wasn't just a one-time thing. This was a pattern. Fast forward to last month. Mark and I had been discussing moving into a bigger place because our apartment was getting a little cramped, and we thought it would be nice to have a bigger space for our future family. We started looking at places, and we found a few we liked. We were getting excited about this new chapter in our lives and starting to plan our wedding at the same time. That's when things took a turn. Mark got a call from his mom, and he told me afterward that Diane was having some issues with her current living situation and needed a place to stay for a while. He mentioned that it was only going to be for a few months, maybe 3 or 4 at most. I didn't immediately think anything of it. I figured it would be like any other time Diane came over. She'd stay for a weekend or so, and then she'd leave. But then Mark told me that Diane was planning to move in permanently. I was stunned. I asked Mark why he hadn't consulted me about this decision, and he said it was because his mom was in a tough spot and that family should help each other. He told me it was only temporary and that it would only be for a few months. But in that moment, I felt like I was being completely sidelined. This was supposed to be our house, and all of a sudden, I was expected to accept his mom moving in without any discussion. I tried to explain to Mark how this made me feel, but he was really adamant that I was overreacting and that I was being too hard on his mom. He even said, "You know she's just looking out for us. You should appreciate that she cares so much." I was furious. I tried to stay calm, but I couldn't hold it in anymore. I told Mark that I wasn't okay with his mom moving in without even discussing it with me first. I reminded him that we had talked about moving to a bigger place and that this wasn't the plan we had. He said that we could still move, but he didn't see the issue with Diane staying with us until we figured things out. The next few days were filled with tension. Mark and I argued constantly about it. I explained that I didn't mind helping his mom out if it was a short-term thing, but I didn't want her living with us permanently. I pointed out that we were supposed to be building a life together, and I didn't feel comfortable with someone else, especially his mom, having such a large influence on our home and our relationship. Mark, however, just couldn't seem to understand my point of view. He kept saying that I was being unreasonable and that his mom needed help, and that this was the right thing to do. I felt like he wasn't listening to me at all. A week later, Mark came home and casually mentioned that Diane had started looking for places to rent around our neighborhood and that she was already picking out furniture for her room in our house. I was floored. Not only was I being completely ignored in this decision, but now it was clear that Diane had already made up her mind that she was going to live with us indefinitely. I felt like I had no say in my own home, and I was starting to feel suffocated by the whole situation. I finally reached my breaking point. I told Mark that I couldn't go through with the wedding if things continued like this. I explained that I didn't feel like we were on the same page when it came to boundaries, and that I didn't want to marry someone who didn't respect my feelings or my space. Mark was absolutely stunned. He said I was being dramatic and that I was making a mountain out of a molehill. I told him that I didn't want to be in a relationship where I was constantly dismissed, and I needed him to understand how serious this was to me. We've been at an impasse ever since. He hasn't really spoken to me about the wedding, and I haven't heard anything from him about the situation with his mom. Our families are upset with me for calling off the wedding and not understanding the importance of family. My friends are divided, with some saying I'm in the right for setting boundaries and others saying I should just let it go and support Mark's decision. I've tried to make it clear to Mark that this isn't just about his mom moving in. It's about us building a life together as a couple, and I don't feel like he's taking my concerns seriously. But right now, it feels like I'm at a crossroads. I don't know if I can move forward with the wedding if I'm not feeling heard or respected. At the same time, I don't want to lose Mark, but I also don't want to give up my sense of autonomy and privacy. So, AITA for calling off the wedding after my fiancé's mom moved into our house without asking? AITA for refusing to give my sister a large amount of money for her wedding after she made a huge request? I, 30F, have a younger sister, Lily, 26F, who is getting married to her fiancé, Ben, 28M. We've always had a somewhat complicated relationship. We're different in many ways, but I've always supported her and tried to be there for her, even though she's not the easiest person to deal with. Lily's always been the fun sister, the one who's spontaneous, a little reckless, and doesn't really think things through before acting. I'm more grounded and tend to plan things carefully, especially when it comes to finances. For context, I've been saving up for a house for years now. It's been my goal for a long time, and I've worked hard to get to a place where I'm finally on track to be able to afford one. It's been a sacrifice, sacrificing vacations, big purchases, and really putting most of my extra income toward that goal. I've been budgeting and planning every step of the way. That's why when Lily came to me with an unusual request for her wedding, I was caught off guard. About 2 months ago, Lily called me and asked if I could meet her to talk about something important. When we met, she told me that she and Ben were planning a dream wedding. She said they had already picked a venue, but it was a bit on the expensive side, and they were having trouble coming up with the funds for it. She said she had already asked their parents, but they couldn't afford to give her much more than a small contribution. At first, I thought she was going to ask for some advice or help with planning. But instead, she dropped a bombshell. She asked if I could lend her $50,000 to help cover the costs of the wedding. To be clear, this wasn't a gift. She said she'd pay me back in installments after the wedding. I was shocked, to say the least. I don't have that kind of money just lying around, and even if I did, I had no intention of lending that much money for a wedding. It wasn't just about the amount of money. It was about the principle of it. I had been working for years to save up for my house, and I wasn't willing to risk that for a wedding, no matter how important it was to her. I tried to explain this to her, and I told her that while I understood how important the wedding was to her, I couldn't afford to lend her that much money. I told her I had my own financial goals and responsibilities to consider, and that I had been working really hard to save for a house. She seemed upset at first, but she assured me that she wasn't asking for a handout and that she was willing to pay me back over time. She even said she'd start making payments after the wedding, even though I knew that wasn't realistic for her. I gently told her that I wasn't in a position to lend her that kind of money, and that I was really sorry, but I had to say no. She didn't take it well. She started to get emotional, saying that I was the only person who could help her, and that if I really loved her, I would support her big day. She pointed out that I had been able to save for a house, and that I should share my blessings with my family. I told her that it wasn't about being selfish. It was about making sure I didn't compromise my own future for something that wasn't in my budget. The conversation ended on a tense note, and I left feeling guilty, but firm in my decision. A few days later, Lily called me again, and this time, her tone was much colder. She told me that she had been thinking about our conversation and that she felt betrayed by me. She said that I was being selfish and inconsiderate, especially considering how much I had been able to save up. She told me that it was disappointing that I wasn't supporting her and that I was choosing money over family. I felt a pang of guilt, but I stood my ground. I reminded her again that I had worked hard for the money I had saved and that I couldn't just give it away, especially when it wasn't my responsibility to pay for her wedding. I told her that I loved her, but I wasn't willing to sacrifice my future for hers. She didn't seem to understand, and the conversation ended with her hanging up on me. After that, things got even worse. Lily started telling other family members about our conversation. She told our parents, our aunts, uncles, and even some cousins that I had refused to help her and that I was choosing money over family. She framed the situation in a way that made me seem like a villain, and I started getting messages from relatives asking why I was being so cold-hearted. My mom even called me to express how disappointed she was in my decision, saying that family should always help each other, especially in times of need. I felt torn. On one hand, I knew I was doing what was right for me. I had my own goals and responsibilities, and I couldn't jeopardize them for something that wasn't my obligation. On the other hand, I hated feeling like I was being painted as the bad guy in this situation. I never imagined that my refusal to lend her money would cause such a rift in our family. The final straw came when Lily posted a picture of her wedding dress on social media and captioned it, "Can't wait for my dream wedding. If only my sister could be there to see it." I felt completely blindsided by that. She was using social media to guilt-trip me in front of everyone, making it seem like I was purposely excluding myself from her big day because I refused to give her money. I was furious. I called her to ask why she would do something like that, and she accused me of making everything about myself and ruining the excitement for her. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was turning the situation into something it wasn't, and I felt like I was being manipulated. After that, I took a step back. I realized that I had done everything I could to explain my position to her, but she wasn't willing to listen. The constant guilt-tripping and manipulation were starting to take a toll on me, and I wasn't sure I wanted to be a part of this toxic dynamic anymore. I started to distance myself from her and from the wedding planning altogether. I still love my sister, but I don't think I can support her in the way she wants me to, especially if it means sacrificing my own future. Now, some of my friends and family are saying that I should just give her the money to avoid causing more drama, while others are telling me that I've made the right decision. I don't know if I'm being unreasonable or if my sister is just asking too much. I feel like I'm in a no-win situation, and I'm honestly exhausted by the whole thing. So, AITA for refusing to give my sister the money for her wedding, even though it's causing a huge rift in our family? AITA for refusing to attend my best friend's wedding because I'm the reason her fiancé found out about her affair? I, 29F, have been best friends with Rachel, 28F, since we were kids. We went through high school together, shared secrets, supported each other through breakups, and celebrated our major life milestones. We were always the kind of friends who knew everything about each other, and I always felt like her happiness was my happiness. Our bond has been unshakable, or at least, that's what I thought until recently. Rachel has been dating her now fiancé, Tom, 31M, for 5 years. He's a genuinely good guy, kind, patient, and always willing to help anyone in need. I've never had any issues with him, but I'll admit, I've always felt a little weird about how much Rachel changes her behavior when he's around. She's not mean or anything, but there's this stark contrast between how she is with me and how she is with him. When it's just the two of us, she's more relaxed, confident, and carefree. When Tom is around, she's more controlled and quieter, almost as if she's trying to fit into this picture-perfect idea of a girlfriend. I never thought too much about it, chalking it up to the usual dynamics of relationships. About 6 months ago, Rachel invited me over for a girls' night to catch up, and it was supposed to be a fun evening of wine, snacks, and gossip. At least, that's what I thought. We were having a blast when Rachel suddenly dropped a bombshell on me. She told me she had been having an affair with one of her coworkers, Jake, 32M, for almost a year. She cried as she explained how guilty she felt, but also how alive and passionate she felt when she was with him. She said that she loved Tom, but the spark had faded in their relationship, and that she felt like she needed to experience that excitement again. At that point, she told me she was planning to marry Tom anyway because he's a great guy and she didn't want to hurt him. She even mentioned that they were getting married in a few months and that Tom had already bought the ring. I was in shock. I didn't know what to say at first because I never saw this side of Rachel. She's always been the one to preach about loyalty and commitment in relationships. And here she was admitting to doing the exact opposite. My gut told me that I needed to tell Tom. I had always been the type of person who believes in doing the right thing, even when it's difficult, and this felt like something I couldn't keep quiet about. But I didn't know how to approach it. I wasn't involved in their relationship. This wasn't my issue to fix. I didn't want to be the person who broke their relationship, but I also didn't want to be complicit in a lie. Rachel begged me not to tell Tom, saying that it would ruin everything. She promised that she would end things with Jake and focus on Tom, claiming she'd learned her lesson. But deep down, I didn't believe her. I didn't trust that she would do what was best for Tom, especially after hearing how she justified her actions to herself. I thought about it for a few days, and I knew I had to tell Tom. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Tom deserved the truth, even if it was going to hurt. I wasn't sure how to do it, so I decided to go the direct route and tell him everything. One evening, I invited Tom out for drinks. He seemed a bit confused but agreed to meet up with me. I didn't want to make this a dramatic confrontation, so I started the conversation by asking him how he was doing and how the wedding planning was going. We had some small talk, but I could tell he was getting anxious about what I was going to say. Eventually, I told him that I needed to talk to him about something important regarding Rachel. I hesitated for a moment, but I couldn't hold back anymore. I told him about the affair. I explained everything I knew, how it had been going on for almost a year, and how Rachel had confessed to me. I told him about her feelings of guilt, her justification for cheating, and her plan to continue with the wedding despite what had happened. Tom's face went pale as he processed the information. He didn't say anything at first, and I could see the shock and confusion in his eyes. Eventually, he managed to say, "I don't know what to say." I stayed with him for a while, just offering support and letting him process everything. He asked me why I didn't tell him earlier, and I told him that I had struggled with the decision, but ultimately, I felt that he deserved to know the truth. We sat in silence for a long time, and he asked me to leave him alone for a few days to think things through. The next few days were a blur. Tom confronted Rachel, and she admitted everything. There were many tears and arguments, but eventually, Rachel called me to yell at me for ruining her life. She told me I had no right to interfere in her relationship, that I was trying to make her look bad, and that I should have kept quiet. She said I had betrayed her, and that she would never forgive me for what I had done. She even accused me of being jealous of her engagement and wanting to ruin her happiness. I tried to explain to her that I was just doing what I thought was right, but she wasn't having it. She told me that I had no idea what it was like to be in a long-term relationship and that I shouldn't have involved myself in something that didn't concern me. She said I was playing the hero and ruining everything. Her tone was angry, and I could tell that our friendship was on the line. As if things weren't complicated enough, the drama didn't end there. Rachel decided to go ahead with the wedding, but she and Tom broke up after their confrontation. He said he couldn't marry someone he couldn't trust, and they called off the engagement. Rachel was heartbroken, but also angry at me for ruining her chance at happiness. She told me that I had taken away her future with Tom, and that I had made her look like a terrible person to everyone. The fallout has been intense. Rachel hasn't spoken to me in weeks, and she's made it clear that she doesn't want anything to do with me. She even told our mutual friends that I was the one who ruined her life and tore apart her relationship. Some of our friends are on her side, while others have said they understand why I did what I did. But the rift between us is palpable, and I'm honestly not sure if our friendship can ever be repaired. I've been questioning whether I did the right thing. I can't shake the feeling that I made the right call by telling Tom the truth, but I also feel guilty about the pain I caused Rachel. I never wanted to destroy her relationship. I just wanted to make sure Tom knew what was going on. But now, I feel like I've lost my best friend over it. So, AITA for telling Tom about my best friend's affair, even though it led to the breakup and now our friendship is in shambles? AITA, forgoing no contact with my sister after she disinvited me from her wedding because of a misunderstanding with my boyfriend. I, 30F, have a sister, Emma, 28F, who has always been close to me in age and temperament. Growing up, we were each other's best friend, sharing secrets, helping each other through difficult times, and generally being the kind of siblings who knew everything about one another. While we've had our differences over the years, we've always been able to communicate and work things out. Emma got engaged to her fiancé, Sam, 32M, last year, and since then, I've been nothing but excited for her. She and Sam have been together for about 4 years, and I can see how happy he makes her. They are truly in love, and I wanted nothing more than to see them tie the knot. Now, I have a boyfriend, Jack, 31M, whom I've been dating for about a year and a half. Jack and I have a strong, healthy relationship, but there's one thing that's been a bit of a point of contention between us, his sense of humor. Jack has always been very sarcastic and playful, and while most people find it endearing, Emma has never really appreciated it. Emma tends to be very serious and straightforward, and when Jack makes his sarcastic jokes, she often takes them the wrong way. I've told him to tone it down around her, but he doesn't always get it. He sees her as uptight and doesn't understand why she can't just take a joke. So, when Emma started planning her wedding, I knew things could get tricky. I didn't want Jack's sense of humor to ruin her special day, so I talked to him beforehand and asked him to be on his best behavior at the wedding. He agreed, but I wasn't sure how he would actually act when the big day arrived. The wedding was set for a Saturday in late spring, and everything was coming together nicely. Emma had picked a beautiful venue, and the guest list was small but intimate. She had asked me to be one of her bridesmaids, which I was honored to accept. I started helping her with the planning, and everything seemed perfect. 2 days before the wedding, Emma had a bridal shower at a local restaurant, and Jack and I attended together. It was a small gathering of close family and friends. During dinner, Jack was being his usual sarcastic self, cracking jokes and making fun of people in a playful way. Most people were laughing, but I could tell that Emma wasn't too impressed. I tried to subtly tell Jack to tone it down, but he just kept going. At one point, he made a joke about the wedding cake, saying something like, "Well, at least it won't be as dry as Emma's speech at the reception." I could tell from the look on Emma's face that she didn't find that funny. I immediately apologized to her, but she seemed to brush it off, saying she was fine. I thought everything would be okay after that, but the tension between Emma and Jack continued to grow throughout the evening. After the shower, we all went home, and I texted Jack telling him to be careful about what he says at the wedding. He wasn't happy about it, but he agreed to keep the sarcasm to a minimum. The wedding day came, and I was really excited. I thought everything would go smoothly, and I tried to ease Emma's nerves as much as I could. The ceremony was beautiful, and everything went off without a hitch. However, when we got to the reception, things started to take a turn. The reception was held at a fancy hotel, and it was filled with family and friends. The atmosphere was lively, and everyone seemed to be in high spirits. Jack was doing well at first, sticking to more neutral topics and avoiding any sarcastic remarks. But during the speeches, when Sam's best man, Greg, made a joke about Sam and Emma's first date, Jack couldn't resist. He leaned over to me and whispered, "Well, at least they didn't get stuck at a fast food drive-thru like us." I laughed nervously, hoping no one else heard him. Unfortunately, Emma overheard him and immediately turned to me with a look of shock and frustration. I tried to apologize quickly, but Emma was already visibly upset. She pulled me aside and said, "Why can't he just keep his mouth shut for once? This is my wedding, and he's ruining it." I tried to explain that it wasn't a big deal and that Jack didn't mean any harm, but she was having none of it. She told me she needed some space and asked me to sit with her family for the rest of the evening. I was hurt but didn't want to make a scene, so I agreed. The rest of the night was incredibly awkward, and every time Jack made a joke, I saw Emma's face tighten. By the end of the evening, she was clearly fuming. We didn't speak much, and when it was time to leave, she didn't even say goodbye to us. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Emma. It was short and to the point. "I don't want Jack at the wedding tomorrow. I know this is supposed to be about me, but he can't keep his comments to himself. Please come alone." I was taken aback. I immediately called her, hoping we could talk things through, but she didn't pick up. I left her a message, explaining that I was really sorry for how things went down and that Jack didn't mean to offend her. I told her I understood if she was upset, but that I didn't think it was fair to ask me to come without him. I said we were a team, and I wanted to support her, but not at the cost of losing my boyfriend. Emma never called me back. Instead, I received a message from her a few hours later that read, "If you choose him over me, then I don't think I can have you at my wedding. I've tried to be patient with him, but I can't let him ruin this day for me." I was shocked. I never imagined that Emma would put me in this position. I called Jack to tell him what had happened, and he was upset too. He said that if it was really that big of a deal, then maybe we should just skip the wedding altogether. I didn't know what to do. I spent the rest of the day thinking it through and finally made the decision to not go to the wedding at all. I texted Emma and told her that I wasn't comfortable coming without Jack and that I didn't think it was right to choose between her and him. I told her that I loved her, but I wouldn't let anyone treat my boyfriend that way. I wished her well and hoped she would understand, but I wasn't going to compromise my relationship for the sake of a wedding. The fallout has been worse than I expected. Emma is furious with me, and our family is divided. Some of them say I made the right call, but others think I should have just gone alone to keep the peace. Emma hasn't spoken to me since, and I'm heartbroken. I love my sister, but I don't know how to fix this. I've been feeling guilty ever since, but I don't think I did anything wrong. So, AITA for not attending my sister's wedding because she asked me to come without my boyfriend after a misunderstanding? AITA for refusing to help my sister financially after she lied to my parents about me? I, 30F, have a younger sister, Sarah, 25F, who has always been a bit difficult. Growing up, she was the rebellious one, always getting into trouble while I was the responsible one, doing well in school and trying to keep the peace. Our parents have always been very supportive of both of us, but for some reason, Sarah has always felt like I'm the golden child, which I've never understood. I've always done my best to help her when she needed it, but lately, things have gotten tense between us. A few months ago, Sarah came to me for help with something major. She had gotten herself into a significant amount of debt after making some poor financial decisions. She had maxed out multiple credit cards, taken out payday loans, and had even borrowed money from a few friends. She had always lived beyond her means, buying clothes, going out with friends, and keeping up with the latest trends, but never really managing her finances. I knew she had been struggling, but when she came to me asking for $10,000 to get out of her debt, I was shocked. I had never been in a position to help her with that kind of money, but I also knew how desperate she was. I've always been a decent saver and have a comfortable job, so I could have probably lent her the money if I wanted to, but there were a few things I needed to consider before making such a big decision. I told Sarah that I would need to think about it, and that I wasn't sure if I could afford to give her that much, especially considering that I wasn't in a position to just hand out large sums of money. I explained that I'd be willing to help her find financial counseling or even refer her to some of my colleagues who work in finance, but I wasn't comfortable just giving her a large chunk of my savings. She didn't take this well. She got upset and told me that I was selfish and unsupportive. She said I had plenty of money and that I should be able to help her out without making her feel guilty. I told her that it wasn't about the money. It was about the principle of managing your finances responsibly and making sure she wasn't getting herself into more debt by relying on others to fix her problems. A few weeks later, things took a turn. My parents called me, and they were extremely upset. Apparently, Sarah had gone to them and told them that I had refused to help her when she was in need, and that I was being cold-hearted and selfish. She painted me as someone who had abandoned her when she needed me most, and my parents were shocked and disappointed in me for not helping. I was furious. I had not refused to help her. I simply hadn't agreed to give her a large sum of money because I didn't think it was a responsible decision. When I confronted her, she admitted that she had exaggerated the situation to make me look bad, but she said she did it because she felt betrayed. She told me that I had always been the perfect daughter, and she was sick of living in my shadow. She said that I didn't understand how hard it was to struggle and that I should have helped her the way she expected me to. I was taken aback. I had always tried to support her, but I had never been in a position to just hand over large amounts of cash to solve her problems. I told her that what she did, lying to our parents, wasn't acceptable and that I wouldn't just give her money out of guilt. I also explained that I felt hurt that she had lied about me and made me look like the bad guy, when I had only tried to explain my reasons for not helping. Since then, things have been extremely tense between us. Sarah has stopped speaking to me altogether, and whenever we see each other at family gatherings, it's awkward. My parents have been very disappointed with me, and they've made comments about how family is supposed to help each other, and how they don't understand why I'm making things harder than they need to be. My mom even told me that I should just give Sarah the money, as it would keep the peace in the family. The thing is, I can't help but feel like I've been treated unfairly. I've worked hard for everything I have, and I don't think I should be expected to give away money to solve someone else's irresponsibility. I've always supported Sarah emotionally and tried to be there for her, but I've never been in a position to fix all of her problems. At this point, I feel like I've been made the villain in this situation when I've done nothing but try to make sure she doesn't rely on me or anyone else for handouts. I've also had friends tell me that I shouldn't have to justify myself to anyone and that I shouldn't feel guilty about not giving her the money. They've pointed out that Sarah's financial issues are the result of her own actions, and it's not my responsibility to clean up her mess. However, my parents keep pushing me to make things right with her, and I'm really struggling with whether or not I'm in the wrong here. So, AITA for refusing to help my sister financially after she lied to my parents about me?